I just paid $72 to fill a Honda Civic. A Honda Civic, not a truck, not an SUV. A four-cylinder compact car that is supposed to be the responsible choice, the fuel-efficient choice, the car you buy when you are trying to save money. $72. And the woman at the pump next to me was crying. I am not being dramatic. She was standing there with the nozzle in her hand, and she was crying. And when she saw me looking, she wiped her face and said, "I do not know how I am going to get to work this week." That was this morning. That was $4.55 a gallon. That is the price right now, Memorial Day weekend, 54% higher than it was 87 days ago when gas was $2.96, and this war had not started yet. Now I need you to imagine something. I need you to imagine the pump in front of you right now, but instead of $4.55, the number says $10. That is not a fantasy. California is already at $6.13. San Francisco diesel is at $8. Wood Mackenzie says oil could hit $200 if the Strait stays closed. Macquarie puts 40% odds on it. And a global risk firm called Maplecroft just ranked the United States the third most likely country on earth for civil unrest in 2026. Third, because they can see the math that most Americans have not done yet. At $10 gas, you spend $10,000 a year just on fuel. Your grocery bill doubles. Your electricity surges 30 to 50%. Your insurance reprices because every material in your house is made from oil. 10,000 trucking companies go bankrupt. Small businesses close by the tens of thousands. The suburbs stop functioning because 190 million people were designed into car dependency with no way out. And 40% of working Americans can no longer afford to drive to their jobs. Not metaphorically, mathematically. The gas costs more than the paycheck. A trucker told the Chicago Sun-Times 3 days ago that he went from spending $700 to fill his rig to $1,000. A chef told his audience that his industry contacts are whispering that prices are about to double or triple in weeks. A food economist at Michigan State said diesel moves every truck, petrochemicals make every package, electricity powers every refrigeration chain. And Newsweek published 5 days ago that food inflation could reach 11% by year-end. At current prices. At $10 gas, that number goes past 20. Gas was $2.96 3 months ago. It is $4.55 today. California is past $6. Diesel is past $7. And the Strait is still closed, and the war is not over. And the subsidies are running out. And summer driving season just started. This video is going to show you exactly what $10 gas does to your commute, your groceries, your electricity, your home, your job, your neighborhood, and your country. And it is going to show you what to do about it while you still have time to do it. Because the woman at the pump this morning who was crying at $4.55 is every single one of us at $10. The only difference is whether you prepared or whether you stood there with the nozzle in your hand wondering what happened. Gas was $2.96 on February 26th. It is $4.55 today. That is a 54% increase in 87 days, and the math from here to $10 is not as far as you think. Let me walk you through the math that nobody on television is doing, because once you see it, you will understand why $10 gas by July is not a fantasy. It is an arithmetic exercise with a very short runway. On February 26, 2026, 2 days before the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran, the national average price of regular gasoline was $2.96 a gallon, according to AAA. That was actually 5% lower than the same week in 2025. Gas was trending down. The pre-war forecasts from GasBuddy projected a 2026 national average of $2.97, the lowest since 2020. The EIA was projecting an average of $2.91. Patrick DeHaan, head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy, said in January that for the first time in a long time, the wind is clearly behind drivers' backs. That was 87 days ago. Today, as of Memorial Day weekend, the national average stands at $4.55 per gallon, an increase of more than 50%, and the highest drivers have paid on the Friday before Memorial Day since 2022 during the Russia-Ukraine invasion, according to CNBC. California is at $6.13. Washington is at $5.78. Hawaii is at $5.65. Nevada is at $5.01. Diesel in California hit $7.50, a 47% increase since the war broke out, according to CNBC. And that $4.55 national average is with the government actively subsidizing prices through the largest strategic petroleum reserve release in IEA history, 172 million barrels, from a reserve that was already at a 40-year low before the war started. The true unsubsidized price right now would be significantly higher. And here is the math that should make your stomach drop. Gas went from $2.96 to $4.55 in 87 days. That is a rate of approximately 1.83 cents per day. At that same rate of increase continuing through July 31st, gas would reach $5.82 nationally. But the rate of increase is not linear. It is accelerating. NPR reported 3 weeks ago that gas went up more than 30 cents in a single week. CNBC reported that gas surged 27 cents in 1 week in late April. And the Center for American Progress published a state-by-state analysis showing Utah up 51.7%, Idaho up 45.7%, Tennessee up 45.6%, Mississippi up 45.4%, and Kentucky up 45%. Those are not coastal states with expensive regulations. Those are middle American states that were supposed to be insulated. And Gas Buddy's Matt McLean told reporters that prices would continue rising regardless of what happens with the war, and that if the president followed through on his threats, it would be record territory. The all-time national record was $5.02 in June 2022. We are 47 cents away from that record right now, and JP Morgan's Natasha Kaneva wrote in a client note that gas prices risk topping $5 per gallon nationally if the Strait remains effectively closed by mid-April. We are past mid-April. The Strait is still closed, and JP Morgan estimated that every 10 cents increase adds $12 billion to annual gasoline spending, eating up all of the expected tax benefit from the administration's tax bill. And that is the path to $10. California is already at $6.13 average, with stations in San Francisco hitting $8 for diesel. If the Strait remains closed through June, which Eurasia Group assigned 55% odds to weeks ago, and oil approaches $150 or $200, which Wood Mackenzie and Macquarie both modeled, the California average hits $8 to $9 for regular. San Francisco, which is already at $8 for diesel, hits double digits. And the national average, currently at $4.55 and rising at an accelerating rate, pushes towards $6 to $7. The USC professor Michael Misha projected California regular at $7.35 to $8.44 by year-end, and a trucker in the reference footage said if oil gets to $300 a barrel, diesel hits $15 a gallon. $10 gas is not an abstraction. California is over $6 today. The Strait is closed. The SPR is being drained. The subsidies are running out. And every week that passes without a resolution pushes the price higher because the buffers are finite and the disruption is ongoing. The distance from $6 to $10 is smaller than the distance from $3 to $6. And we already covered that distance in 87 days. If gas hits $10 a gallon, you cannot afford to go to work. And that is not an exaggeration. It is math that 40% of American households will face. A woman in the reference footage said something that should be printed on a billboard outside every Capitol building in Washington. She said, if I am making $20 an hour and I am working 40 hours a week and I am having to pay $300 to $400 a week almost for gas alone, I cannot afford to go to work. And she is not wrong. Let me do the math for you right now, because this is the calculation that proves $10 gas does not just make life harder. It makes working for a living economically irrational for nearly half the country. The average American commute is 27.6 minutes each way, according to the Census Bureau, which translates to roughly 30 to 40 miles round trip per day for most workers. The average car gets about 26 miles per gallon, according to the Department of Transportation. That means a typical commuter uses approximately 1.2 to 1.5 gallons per day just getting to and from work. At $4.55 a gallon, your daily commute costs you about $5.50 to $6.80. Annoying but manageable. At $10 a gallon, that same commute costs $12 to $15 per day. That is $60 to $75 per week. That is $260 to $325 per month, just in gas to drive to your job. And that is just the commute. That does not include driving to the grocery store, picking up your kids, running errands, or getting to a doctor. If you are a rural worker driving 50 to 80 miles round trip, which millions of Americans do, the numbers are catastrophic. At $10 gas, a 60-mile round-trip commute in a truck getting 18 miles per gallon costs you $33 a day. That is $165 a week. That is $715 a month, just to get to work. And the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. A full-time minimum wage worker grosses $1,160 a month before taxes. After taxes, they take home roughly $1,000 to $1,050. If $715 of that goes to gas, they have $300 left for rent, food, phone, insurance, and everything else. That is not a livable situation. That is not even a survivable situation. And it is not just minimum wage workers who face this math. The median household income in the United States is roughly $80,000 to $85,000. After taxes, that is approximately $5,000 to $5,500 per month for a dual-income family. If both adults are commuting and their combined gas costs at $10 a gallon are $600 to $1,400 per month, depending on distance and vehicle, that is 10 to 25% of their take-home pay going to fuel alone. Add a mortgage at $2,200. Add groceries at $1,200. Add insurance at $540. Add utilities at $350. Add childcare if they have kids. The math runs out before the month does. And Ed Yardeni calculated that at current gas prices, which are only $4.55, the typical household is already spending $4,800 annualized on gas, up 70% from a year ago. At $10 gas, that number crosses $10,000 a year. For a family making $60,000, that is 17% of their gross income, more than a quarter of their take-home, going to gasoline. And the fuel logic analysis warned that at extreme gas prices, commuting becomes unaffordable for many workers, leading to a spike in absenteeism, a reduction in the labor pool, and a cascading effect on businesses that depend on workers showing up. People do not quit because they want to. They quit because the cost of getting to the job exceeds the income the job provides. And when millions of workers simultaneously reach that math, the economy does not contract gradually. It collapses at the point where working becomes more expensive than not working. And for 40% of American households, $10 gas is that point. A trucker who used to spend $500 every 5 days on fuel just told the Chicago Sun-Times he is now spending $800 and he is thinking about selling his trucks to stay alive. 3 days ago. Not last month. Not in some report from a think tank. 3 days ago, the Chicago Sun-Times published a piece where a food truck operator named Guerrero said he typically spends about $500 every 5 days to fill up his 3 food trucks. 2 run on gas. 1 needs diesel. Now it costs him over $800. That is $300 more every 5 days. That is $2,190 extra per month that did not exist in his budget 3 months ago. And in brighter times, he had planned to add 3 more trucks to his business. Now he said he would sell those trucks just to reinvest back in the 3 he already has. He has been building up his savings for years, and now he fears he will need to dip into that account just to keep operations running. And he is not some Wall Street figure. He is a 54-year-old man with food trucks, and the war is destroying him. A West Virginia trucker named David Claypool told the same outlet that filling his truck went from $700 to $1,000. That is $300 extra per fill. He said you add that every week, and that is quite a bit of loss. And another West Virginia operator named Kevin Riggs broke down the math that shows why the trucking industry is the first domino in the $10 gas collapse. He said his truck gets 6 miles per gallon. At $5 a gallon, it costs him almost $1 a mile just to spin his wheels before he can start making money. At $10 diesel, that number doubles to $1.67 per mile in fuel alone. And the average loaded cost per mile for a trucking company, including all expenses, is between $1.50 and $2.50, according to DAT Freight and Analytics. At $10 diesel, the fuel cost alone exceeds the total per mile revenue for many small carriers. They would literally be paying more in fuel than they earn for the haul. That is not a business, that is a money fire. And PBS documented the speed of the diesel spike. From March 2nd to March 16th, just 14 days, diesel went from $3.89 to $5.37. That is a 38% increase in 2 weeks. And that was at the beginning of the war. Diesel in California is now $7.50 according to CNBC, as of late April. At that price, Claypool's $1,000 fill-up becomes $1,500. And Gas Buddy's Matt McLean called the increase in diesel an extraordinarily sharp increase in a very short amount of time and warned of a trickle-down effect impacting the price of everything. Both FedEx and UPS have already bumped up fuel surcharge rates and implemented temporary fees for shipments. Industry expert David Sullivan warned of more price volatility and targeted lane fees tied to the conflict. And USDA data shows that trucks ship 83% of all agricultural products and 92% of dairy, fruit, vegetables, and nuts in the United States. So when diesel hits $10 and the trucker's math stops working, the food stops moving. Not gradually, it stops. Because a trucker who is losing money on every mile driven does not keep driving. He parks. And when enough truckers park, the grocery store does not get restocked. And when the grocery store does not get restocked, the shelves that are already thinning go empty, and the people who thought $10 gas was just a pain at the pump discover that $10 gas means no food on the shelf, because nobody can afford to deliver it. Newsweek published 5 days ago that food inflation could reach 11% by the end of 2026, and at $10 gas that number doubles. 5 days ago, Newsweek ran a headline that should have caused a national panic. Grocery prices are about to go the way of gas prices. Up. And the economist they quoted, a man named Barrett, said he expects food price inflation to reach around 11% on a year-over-year basis by the end of 2026. 11%. And he said this will hit Americans struggling to feed their families. And the Purdue University agricultural economists Ken Foster and Bernhard Dahlheimer told Newsweek that pre-conflict forces were already exerting meaningful upward pressure on food prices before the first shot was fired. And then they said the sentence that explains why $10 gas turns a food price problem into a food availability problem. They said diesel moves every truck, petrochemicals make every package, and electricity powers every refrigeration chain. Every single layer of the food system runs on oil. And David Ortega, a food economist at Michigan State University, told KCUR and NPR affiliates across the country that the USDA's food-at-home forecast has been revised to 3.1%, which is nearly double the projection from the start of the year. And he said that is before the fertilizer wave hits. He explained that the increased cost of oil-derived nitrogen fertilizer could prompt farmers to apply less on their fields this season. Lower crop yields in the fall will mean less feed for livestock and could drive up the cost of beef. And Andy Harrig from FMI, the Food Industry Association, told reporters that seafood has been hit immediately because it is typically transported by air and jet fuel has surged. And he said processors and retailers know one thing for sure. It is going to impact prices, and it is going to be in a longer window than just the day the war ends. Now scale that to $10 gas. At current gas prices, the USDA says 3.1% food inflation. At $10 gas, diesel is somewhere between $12 and $15 per gallon, based on the historical diesel-to-gas premium of 20 to 50%. At $12 to $15 diesel, the cost of moving food roughly triples from pre-war levels. The cost of producing food triples because tractors run on diesel. The cost of packaging food doubles because plastics are petroleum-derived. The cost of refrigerating food increases because electricity from natural gas gets more expensive. And the 11% food inflation that Barrett projected to Newsweek was based on current oil prices around $110. At $200 oil, which Wood Mackenzie projected, if the Strait stays closed through year-end, food inflation could push past 20%. At $10 gas, we are in unprecedented territory. No economic model in the post-war era accounts for a scenario where every input cost, fuel, fertilizer, packaging, labor, transportation, refrigeration, all double simultaneously over a period of weeks. The closest analogy is the 1970s stagflation, and during that period, food prices increased roughly 50% over 5 years. At $10 gas, we could compress that into 12 months. A person in the reference footage said she used to make spaghetti for $20 to $25, then it became $40 to $50. At $10 gas, that same spaghetti dinner costs $60 to $75. A family spending $300 a week on groceries right now would be spending $450 to $600. And the family of 5 in the reference footage, spending $1,500 a month, would be looking at $2,200 to $3,000 per month on food. And 34% of Americans already skipped a meal last year because they could not afford it. At $10 gas, that number does not double. It becomes the majority. And a country where the majority of its citizens cannot afford to eat is not a country in an economic downturn. It is a country in free fall. Your electricity bill is about to explode because 43% of American power comes from natural gas, and natural gas follows oil the way a shadow follows the body. A woman in San Diego looked at her electric bill and said, "Tell me why my bill is almost $400 every month. I do not have AC. I do not use a lot of electricity. I had someone come out and look. They charged me for it, found nothing. Said that is just normal. And she is right to be furious, because her bill has nothing to do with how many lights she leaves on. Her bill is being driven by something she cannot see and cannot control, and almost nobody is explaining to her. Natural gas. According to the Energy Information Administration, natural gas fueled 43.1% of U.S. electricity generation in 2023, making it the single largest source of electricity in the country. When natural gas prices rise, your electricity bill rises, even if you did not turn on a single additional appliance. And natural gas follows oil. They are not the same commodity, but they trade in correlated markets because they are partial substitutes in industrial use and because the production and transportation infrastructure overlaps. When oil spikes, natural gas gets pulled upward. PBS documented that LNG exports through the Strait of Hormuz were shut down when Qatar Energy was forced to halt production at Ras Laffan and Maysaid, two of the largest LNG facilities on Earth, after Iranian attacks. Qatar is the world's largest LNG exporter, and nearly all of its shipments pass through Hormuz. When those shipments stopped, global LNG prices surged. And full projected European gas prices could hit 80 to 100 euros per megawatt hour. And the U.S., which has been exporting record amounts of LNG to help allies, is now being pulled into the global price vortex. Higher global LNG prices mean U.S. producers can sell their gas overseas for more money, which tightens domestic supply, which pushes domestic prices up. At current oil prices, the impact on your electricity bill is moderate, maybe 10 to 15% above last year. But at $10 gas, with oil at $200 or higher, and natural gas prices spiking in sympathy, electricity rates could increase 30 to 50% or more for the roughly 40% of the country that gets its power from gas. And here is the part that connects this to the daily life of every person watching this video. Your electricity does not just power your lights, it powers your refrigerator, your freezer, your HVAC system, your water heater, your phone charger, your internet router. Every single thing in your house that keeps you fed, comfortable, connected, and safe runs on electricity. And for 43% of the country, that electricity comes from a fuel that is rising in price because of a war on the other side of the world that closed a waterway most Americans had never heard of before March. And a woman in the reference footage said her family's situation is already impossible. Husband works 3 jobs, $230 in checking. Electric bill is $220 due at the end of the month, at a 30 to 50% increase from $10 gas and its downstream effect on natural gas, that $220 bill becomes $290 to $330. And the family that was already choosing between food and bills now has one more bill they cannot pay. And that choice, repeated across tens of millions of households simultaneously, is not a utility problem. It is the mechanism by which $10 gas reaches inside your walls and turns the lights off while you are still sitting in the room wondering what happened. Because $10 gas does not just empty your tank, it empties your refrigerator, your bank account, and your ability to keep the house running. And most people will not connect their electricity bill to the Strait of Hormuz until they are sitting in the dark. Home insurance premiums have already jumped 57% since 2019, and at $10 gas, the cost of rebuilding your house makes you uninsurable. Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies published its annual State of the Nation's Housing Report this year, and buried inside it is a number that should terrify every homeowner in America. Home insurance premiums have jumped 57% from 2019 to 2024, with the sharpest increases in areas with the greatest risk of a climate-related disaster. Insurance now represents 9% of the typical homeowner's monthly mortgage payment, the highest share on record. And premiums are projected to rise another 8% in 2026 and another 8% in 2027. And in 2023, insurers paid out $1.11 in claims for every $1 earned in premiums. They lost money. The insurance model itself is breaking. And the scale and frequency of climate disasters has prompted private insurers not only to raise premiums, but in some cases to reduce coverage or pull out of markets entirely. State Farm pulled out of California. Farmers Insurance pulled out of Florida. Allstate is restricting new policies. In the highest-risk states, homeowners cannot find a company willing to insure them at any price. And here is where $10 gas turns an insurance crisis into a housing collapse. Insurance companies price premiums based on replacement cost, which is how much it would cost to rebuild your house from the ground up. That cost is driven by construction materials and labor. Asphalt shingles are made from petroleum. PVC pipes are petroleum-derived. Insulation contains petroleum-based materials. Paint contains petroleum solvents. Carpet is mostly nylon or polyester, both derived from petroleum. And every single piece of building material, every sheet of drywall, every 2x4, every bag of concrete arrives at the job site on a truck burning diesel. At current prices, the NAHB estimates tariffs alone have added $10,900 to the cost of a new home. Tufts University reported that the average home insurance premium rose from $1,902 in 2020 to $2,530 in 2023, a 33% increase driven by the rising cost of construction materials. At $10 gas, with oil above $200 and every petroleum-derived material doubling or tripling in price, the cost to rebuild a $400,000 home could reach $550,000 to $650,000. And insurance companies will reprice premiums to match that replacement cost. A homeowner currently paying $3,000 a year in insurance could be looking at $5,000 to $7,000. That is not a line item on a budget. That is a second car payment that appeared out of nowhere, and for a homeowner already spending 35 to 40% of their income on mortgage, taxes, and insurance, a $200 to $400 monthly increase in insurance alone could be the thing that pushes them over the edge. The woman in the reference footage whose mortgage went up $607 in 5 years because of insurance and property taxes was already in trouble at $4.55 gas. At $10 gas, her insurance doubles again. And the 20.3 million homeowners who Harvard documented as already cost-burdened are joined by millions more who were previously fine but can no longer absorb the combined shock of gas, groceries, electricity, and insurance, all repricing simultaneously. A woman in the reference footage said she just got her renewal, and her auto policy is up $500, and her homeowner's is up $800. She said, "I am just supposed to magically find an extra $1,300 lying around." At $10 gas, that number is $2,500 to $3,500. And the answer for most families is the same answer that the woman gave. There is no extra money. There is no magic, there is just the growing realization that the house you own is becoming a financial trap you cannot afford to keep and cannot afford to leave. At $10 gas, the American suburbs stop functioning, and 190 million people who were designed into car dependency have nowhere to go. America was built on cheap gas. I do not mean that metaphorically, I mean that literally. The entire physical layout of the country, the sprawling suburbs, the strip malls, the big box stores surrounded by parking lots, the schools that are 3 miles from the nearest house, the offices that are 20 miles from the nearest affordable neighborhood. All of it was designed during an era when gasoline cost less than $1 a gallon, and nobody imagined it would ever be different. And that design locked 190 million Americans into car dependency, not by choice, by infrastructure. The Brookings Institution and the Census Bureau have documented that roughly 60% of the American population lives in suburban areas. And unlike European or Asian cities where dense development and public transit make car-free living viable, American suburbs were intentionally designed to require a car for every trip. No sidewalks in many neighborhoods, no bike lanes, no bus stops within walking distance, no grocery store you can reach on foot. If you live in a suburb and you do not have a car, you do not have access to food, work, school, or health care, period. And public transit in most of America is functionally non-existent. Outside of a handful of cities like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and Washington, the average American has no real transit option. The ASCII noted that public transit got a D- on the National Infrastructure Report Card. Bus routes have been cut, train lines have been defunded, and the systems that do exist are underfunded, unreliable, and nowhere near the suburbs where the majority of the population lives. At $4.55 gas, the suburbs are already strained. Families are making fewer trips, consolidating errands, skipping activities that require driving. At $10 gas, the suburb breaks. A family with 2 working adults making a combined $80,000 could spend $1,200 to $1,800 per month on gasoline alone, depending on commute distance and vehicle efficiency. That is the entire food budget, gone into the gas tank. And the people who cannot afford it do not have an alternative. They cannot take the bus because there is no bus. They cannot ride a bike because there is no bike lane, and their job is 25 miles away. They cannot walk because the nearest grocery store is 4 miles down a highway with no sidewalk. They are trapped by the design of the country itself, and the design assumed $2 gas forever. At $10 gas, suburban homes lose value because the cost of living in them becomes prohibitive. The home that was worth $400,000 when gas was $3 becomes worth $320,000 when gas is $10 because buyers factor commuting costs into affordability calculations and the math no longer works. And the 65% of American household wealth that is stored in home equity starts evaporating, not because the house changed, because the cost of getting to and from the house changed. And 190 million people who were designed into car dependency with no public transit alternative and no walkable infrastructure and no way out suddenly discover that the American suburb, the symbol of the middle-class dream, was always one price shock away from becoming a trap. And at $10 gas, the trap closes. Small businesses will die by the tens of thousands because at $10 gas, their customers cannot afford to drive to them and their suppliers cannot afford to deliver to them. 30.7 million. That is the number of small businesses in the United States. They employ 46% of the private sector workforce. They are the restaurants and the barbershops and the auto repair shops and the dry cleaners and the dentist offices and the coffee shops and the plumbers and the electricians and the food trucks and the flower shops that make up the actual economy that you interact with every day. They are not on the stock exchange. They do not have hedge fund backers. They do not have fuel hedging contracts. They operate on margins so thin that a single bad month can put them under. And at $10 gas, they are finished. Start with their customers. At $10 gas, discretionary driving collapses. People do not drive to the hair salon when gas costs $15 per trip. They do not drive to the restaurant when the combined cost of gas and the meal exceeds what they would spend cooking at home. A woman in the reference footage said, haircuts for her family cost $350 in a single week. The hair appointments, the dog grooming, the kids. At $10 gas, the cost of driving to those appointments adds another $30 to $50 in fuel. And the customers disappear. Not because the service is bad, because the trip is too expensive. And a barbershop that loses 30% of its walk-ins does not adjust. It closes. Now move to their supply chain. At $10 gas, diesel is $12 to $15 per gallon. The small business owner in the reference footage who received price increase notices from every supplier in a single week said his plastic bottles went up 5%, his packaging went up, USPS raised rates 8%, and Amazon added a 3.5% surcharge. That was at $5 diesel. At $12 to $15 diesel, those increases double or triple. And the food truck operator in the Chicago Sun-Times, whose fuel cost went from $500 to $800 every 5 days, would be looking at $1,300 to $1,600 every 5 days at $10 gas. That is $7,800 to $9,600 per month in fuel alone, for a food truck. Now move to their employees. At $10 gas, the employees who drive to work face the same math the customers face. The commute that costs $6 a day now costs $15. The employee making $18 an hour is spending $75 a week just to get to the job. And at some point, the employee tells the small business owner, I cannot afford to come in anymore. And the business that was already losing customers is now losing staff. And SEMrush documented that 66% of small businesses were already facing financial challenges before the war started. Small Business Chapter 5 bankruptcies were already up 91% year over year, and Crisis Investing estimated that 6,000 to 10,000 trucking carriers would exit the market at $6 diesel, which means the small businesses that survive the customer loss and the supply cost increase may still die because there is no truck available to deliver their inventory. At $10 gas, the small business economy in America does not contract, it disintegrates. And the 46% of the private sector workforce that depends on those businesses for a paycheck discovers that their job disappeared, not because of automation or AI or corporate restructuring, but because gasoline got too expensive for anyone to drive to the store, drive the delivery truck, or drive to work. And that is how $10 gas turns a fuel price problem into a mass unemployment event. One closed business at a time, one empty parking lot at a time, one boarded-up storefront at a time, until the downtown that used to have 30 businesses has 12, and the strip mall that used to be full has half its units dark, and the neighborhood that used to be a community is just a collection of houses where people sit because they cannot afford to go anywhere. Every fuel price shock in modern history has triggered social unrest, and a global risk firm just ranked the United States as the third most likely country on Earth to experience it in 2026. Maplecroft, one of the world's largest political and economic risk intelligence firms, published its 2026 Civil Unrest Index and ranked the United States as the third highest risk country on the planet for disruptive protests and civil unrest. Third, behind only 2 other nations. And they noted that the U.S. recorded the sharpest increase in protest size over the last 12 months of any country in their dataset. Allianz Commercial published a separate analysis 3 days ago confirming that cost of living pressures are fueling protests globally and that this disruption is no longer an emerging market footnote. It is now a scenario requiring stress testing in high-income countries, including France, Germany, and the United States. And the IMF published a comprehensive study finding that retail fuel price increases are directly and unconditionally associated with social unrest, and that countries that are net fuel importers, politically unstable, and under economic stress tend to experience the most fuel riots. The United States is the world's largest consumer of oil. It is running a $1.9 trillion deficit. Its population has 7% confidence in Congress, and 79% of its voters say the country is falling apart. Every condition the IMF identified as a predictor of fuel-driven unrest is present, and the historical record is consistent. In 2018, France raised fuel taxes by a few cents per liter, and the result was the Yellow Vest movement, the largest sustained protest France had seen in half a century. Barricades in the streets, cars burning. Macron's approval dropping to 23%. Billions of dollars in economic damage, and that was over a few cents. In Chile in 2019, a 4% increase in metro fares, driven by higher energy costs, triggered weeks of violent protests that left 30 dead and more than 1,500 injured. The government was forced to draft a new constitution. In Kazakhstan in 2022, a fuel price hike triggered nationwide protests that left over 225 dead. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and price increases helped collapse the entire government. The president fled the country by military aircraft. In Nigeria, fuel subsidy removal in 2023 doubled gas prices overnight and triggered mass protests across every major city. And in Indonesia in August 2025, fuel price increases contributed to widespread rioting that caused over $50 million in insured losses and crashed the stock market 7%. The pattern is so consistent that the World Economic Forum published a feature titled How Economic Discontent Has Triggered Unrest in the Past, and cited Aristotle, who described poverty as the parent of revolution. And the United States at $4.55 gas has not yet reached the tipping point. People are grumbling but managing. But at $10 gas, when 40% of households cannot afford to drive to work, and grocery bills have doubled, and electricity is up 30 to 50%, and small businesses are closing by the tens of thousands, and the suburbs stop functioning, and the government is visibly unable to fix any of it. The conditions that produced the Yellow Vests and the Chile protests and the Sri Lanka collapse are not just present, they are exceeded. Because the IMF's research showed that the probability of unrest increases with the size of the fuel price increase and the weakness of the social safety net. And a country where 53% cannot cover a $1,000 emergency, where 111 million carry credit card debt they cannot pay, where 34% skipped meals, where trust in every institution is at or near record lows, and where gas just increased 54% in 87 days. That is not a country that absorbs another doubling without consequence. $10 gas is not an economic event, it is a social stability event. And Maplecroft ranked the United States third in the world for a reason. At $10 gas, the country you grew up in ceases to exist, and what replaces it is something America has never experienced before. I have spent this entire video walking you through what $10 gas does to individual systems. Your commute, your grocery bill, your trucking industry, your electricity, your insurance, your housing, your small businesses, your job, and each one of those impacts is devastating on its own. But the thing that makes $10 gas different from every other economic crisis in modern American history is that it hits every system simultaneously. In 2008, the crisis was housing. The job market was still functioning. The grocery stores were full. Gas was expensive but came back down. There were systems you could lean on while the broken one got fixed. In 2020, the crisis was a pandemic. The government sent stimulus checks. The Fed cut rates to zero. Eviction moratoriums were enacted. There were systems that held while the emergency played out. At $10 gas, there is no system to lean on because every system is breaking at the same time for the same reason. Oil. Oil is in the diesel that moves your food, in the fertilizer that grows it, in the plastic that packages it, in the asphalt on the road you drive on, in the shingles on your roof, in the chemicals that treat your water, in the jet fuel that flies your medicine across the country, in the natural gas that powers your electricity. Every system in America runs on oil, and at $10 gas, every system in America reprices at the same time, and here is what that world looks like. And I am not speculating, I am describing what the data from every section of this video adds up to when you put it together. At $10 gas, the average household spends $10,000 a year on fuel, up from $2,500 before the war. Grocery bills are up 40 to 80% depending on the category. Electricity is up 30 to 50%. Insurance is up 30 to 60%. And the total cost of simply existing, rent, food, gas, utilities, insurance, phone, medicine, goes from around $5,500 a month for a family of 4 to $7,500 to $8,500. And the median household income has not changed. The gap between what it costs to live and what people earn becomes a chasm that credit cannot bridge because the credit is already at 99.2% utilization, and the Fed cannot cut rates, and the government cannot send stimulus, and the employer cannot give raises because their costs went up too. There is no bridge, and when there is no bridge, people fall. And when enough people fall at the same time, the country does not have a recession, it has a transformation. The word economists use is demand destruction. And at the household level, demand destruction looks like this. You stop driving anywhere that is not essential. You stop eating out. You stop buying clothes. You cancel every subscription. You stop going to the dentist. You pull your kids out of after-school programs because you cannot afford the gas to pick them up. You start eating rice and beans 5 nights a week. You sell the second car. You miss a credit card payment. Then 2. Then 3. You let the insurance lapse because you cannot pay the premium and eat in the same month. You stop planning vacations. You stop imagining next year. You start thinking in weeks instead of months. And then one night you are sitting at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. and your spouse looks at you and says, "I do not know how we are going to make it through the summer." And you do not have an answer. That is what $10 gas looks like, not on a chart, in your kitchen, in your marriage, in the silence between two people who did everything right and still ended up here. And the only honest thing I can tell you is this: it is only going to get worse before it gets better. The Strait is still closed. The war is still going. The SPR is draining. The subsidies are running out. The fertilizer wave has not hit. And summer driving season just started, so do not wait. Build your cash reserve this week. Stock your pantry at today's prices. Fill your tank and keep it full. Attack your highest interest debt. Map every expense that is connected to energy and find alternatives before the price forces you to. And tell someone you love about this video. Not because I need views, because they need time. And time is the one thing that is running out faster than the oil. Take care of yourselves out there. It is going to be a long summer.